When it comes to renowned LA sleazebags, it doesn't get much farther than beat poet Bukowski. The hardscrabble life of Henry Bukowski starts hardscrabble. His father, Henry, was an American soldier fighting occupying Rhineland in Western Germany during World War I, which is where he met Bukowski's mother, who was from there. Little Heinrich Karl Bukowski Jr. was born there in Anderock, Germany in August 1920. The family moved with baby Bukowski to America, first to Baltimore, then to Southern California. The Bukowskis start in Pasadena at 231 South Hudson Avenue, then to Los Angeles proper at 2122 Longwood Avenue in the West Adams area. This is his childhood home. You can go visit it. I think it's still
there.
I think, yeah, there's a website. I'll talk about the website at the end, but there's a website with a timeline of his life, what was happening in LA history, and all the addresses around that year that he was at. And there's a lot of addresses. So this was his childhood home there in Longwood Avenue, and it was the first brewing ground for trauma. Bukowski's dad was a terror, like a strict disciplinarian who would beat Charles with a razor strop for even the minor, and like just small. It's a strop. I'm not quite sure. Like it's
a strop.
I thought they misspelled strap on every website, but it's called a strop. It's a bunch of branches unless you're in the Jackson family. Then it's a swish.
Yeah, different families have different words
and
for
you're in trouble,
how they create trauma that's passed down through generations. Sometimes to other families.
Sometimes it passes on. Sometimes it's just a cloud of trauma, like a swarm of bees that you carry around with you. He would beat the hell out of Charles if he didn't mow the lawn to his dad's meticulous liking. Like it had to be done so specifically.
As a soldier, I guess that's that military training.
I mean, I don't want to disparage military men out there.
Please, the captain is in the corner.
Yeah, the admiral is back there.
He's not admirable. He's clearly Captain Crunch. He's not admirable. Admiral. He's the admirable
What
Captain
I admire
Crunch.
about him is that he's an admiral. Stress of these beatings caused little Charles to develop boils all over his face, which scarred him for life, which is why his face is so messed. Like it's a lot of
sense. Yeah, he's got a very Edward James Olmos sort of face going on.
LA Times Magazine writer Paul Ciotto described his face as having a sandblasted face, warts in his eyelids, and a dominating nose that looks as if somebody assembled it in a junkyard from a Studebaker hoods and a Buick fenders.
Boy, the press was so kind to him.
They're like, oh, he hates himself. It's okay if we're mean to him too. He won't feel it. As a kid, he did not...
He knows what he looks like.
What, mirrors don't exist? As a kid, he did not adjust well. He was bullied. He failed to make pals that were quote-unquote idiot friends. It all changed at the age of 13 when Bukowski took the first step towards the future. He discovered alcohol in the wine cellar of his friend's home at 13. And this was the answer to beatings and boils and rejections. He said, it was magic. Why hadn't someone told me already that this was a thing?
I had to wait till I was 13 to
13
become an
before I
alcoholic?
can start coping with all of this. As it is with many abused child discovering alcohol or drugs, like self-medicating and self-destruction would blend into this discovery. Like, I feel better. I better do it every day. And then like suddenly you've been drinking every day since you were 13. For middle school, he went to Mount Vernon Junior High, which is now Johnny Cochran Middle School. And at the age of 14, Bukowski missed 6 months of middle school as he underwent really painful surgery to deal with, he had like acne vulgaris, which is like a really hard form of acne, which I guess comes from the boils he got because he was stressed out. That's how bad his acne had gotten that bad where he needed to get surgery for it.
On Accutane.
If only. This must have been the 30s, the depression.
Before they cure polio, they should have had Accutane.
Yeah, I had to walk around with this thing. Already, the 14-year-old had to struggle with so much physical and emotional issues. So to deal with this, Bukowski would go to Baldwin Hills Branch Library and escape into books.
Interesting.
He was a voracious reader, and the love of literature would push him to try to write. At the Baldwin Hills Branch is where he would write his first short story about a World War I pilot.
It's weird that the library doesn't promote that more.
They do.
Oh, they do?
I don't know about the Baldwin Hills branch, but I know LAPL's, it's like Ray Bradbury and Charles Bukowski wrote here.
I only ever hear Ray Bradbury and that the poet who read a poem at
the inauguration.
They're like, look at these great people. But I never hear them like, and Charles Bukowski, which speaks to why he's in this episode.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I've read that enough times, but there's sort of like, he's always like third or fourth on the list.
Yeah,
like,
I don't think there's pictures of Charles Bukowski up in the kids section.
What's in that paper bag?
No, that's just the patrons.
That's just every normal person. He's holding it for somebody else. And what was his dad up to at this time? Around this time, Bukowski's father has lost his job and he was pretending to go to work every day, which is what family annihilators do, just so you know. So by the age of 14, 3 things made up the reality of Charles Bukowski: abuse, drinking and reading used as escapism, and writing. This was like his personality was these 3 things that fit together. As a teenager, all he could do was keep trudging on. He attended Susan Miller Dorsey High School in Crenshaw and continued being a below average student who would drag through most subjects but then rush off to the library to read. He would outgrow Baldwin Hills Branch and graduated to the beautiful Central Library in downtown on 5th and Grand, where he first read John Fanty's novel Ask the Dust. Have you heard of this book before?
Yeah, I have. When we were flirting with the idea of doing a book club, I think someone had recommended, when we asked for suggestions, Ask the Dust.
So a lot of people say this is the best LA book ever written.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
Hey, you're talking to the guy who broke P22, so I haven't heard of it.
I haven't heard of it, and I would know. Anyways, he finds Ask the Dust, which was published, I think, like around the same time. Like, it was published in 1939, and he must have found it around that time. Like, it wasn't like an ancient book sitting on the shelf. Like, it was like a new
hot
one.
off the press.
Hot off the presses, yeah. It was hugely influential to him. It was about a low-life writer named Arturo Bandini in a tumultuous relationship living in Los Angeles, which is like his entire life is that. He would later write...
and he had bad acne, too.
He would later write the introduction to the reprint of Ask the Dust, and here's a small snippet. Yes, Fanty had a mighty effect upon me. Not long after reading these books, I began living with a woman. She was a worse drunk than I was, and we had some violent arguments, and often I would scream at her, "Don't call me a son of a bitch. I am Arturo Bandini." Fantini was my god, and I knew the god should be left alone. One didn't bang at their door. Yet I liked to guess about where he had lived on Angel's Flight, and I imagined it possible that he still lived there. Almost every day I walked by and thought, is that the window that Camilla crawled through? Is that the hotel door? Is that the lobby? I never knew. I do the same thing when I like form a residence of a famous person. I'm like, is that the window that like this, that? And like that was his like idol. A lot of fantasies were filled with John Fanty.
Not even just like houses of famous people, but stories that take place in Los Angeles in fictional buildings and stuff. I'll see a building that like, that could be the building that I thought the book happened in, and I'll stick to that forever and think like that's where.
I took the esoteric Raymond Chandler tour like a million years ago, and they took us to a bunch of spots. But sometimes I'll be at a red light. I forget what building it is in downtown, but they say that Chandler used to play chess in the lobby with somebody, and I'd pass a table every once in a while, like, you dirty old bastard, you drunk nobody.
Whenever I pass that trash can in Pershing Square, I always think about Speed.
Me too. And I look at the trash can and I look up at the windows. Like, which one is the one that Dennis Hopper lives? In 1939, he left school with a C average and enrolled in LACC to study journalism and English.
I mean,
LACC.
Otherwise he'd be in LABB or LAAA.
That's very funny.
He should be in LAAA.
LA:AA.
If only he could get himself to an AA average.
Very funny. Letters are very funny.
Not just letters, numbers too.
Numbers are also quite funny. Like, let's say 109. LACC also likes to be like, Charles Bukowski came here.
Oh, really?
But now they're like, Community was filmed here, and also Charles Bukowski. His home life, in particular, his bouts with his dad only got worse as he got older. His dad read some of his stories that Charles was writing and destroyed them. Because of this.
This is why you don't tell your parents.
This is why you don't tell your parents. His dad would... I think he threw everything out of the window onto the lawn.
Was he divorcing him?
He was divorcing him. He was kicking him out for cheating. I remember reading a passage of like they threw it out on the lawn that if Charles didn't keep meticulous care of, he'd get beaten for, and his dad was throwing his writing like it's like a poetic circle of pain. Because of stuff like this, Bukowski started finding other places to live. Returning home only we had nothing left. He started bumming it up and finding crappy dumps to stay at. He stayed in an apartment on 3rd and Flower. He stayed at a room on Temple in Filipino Town. He left LA for Atlanta at some point and was living in a shack eating only candy bars. He'd come back, like I said.
Why did he leave?
Dude, candy bars love you way more than your dad does. Don't come back.
Was he trying to start a podcast about candy? Because if he was...
The best meal I had in the last 2 days was this 3 Musketeers. It saved my life.
4 cavities.
4 cavities. He soon dropped out of LACC, and after deciding all he wanted to do was be a writer and traveler. So this was like, he was going to give 100% of his attention to this. At the onset of World War II, he was urged by people, his friends, and I think his dad, to enlist and serve his country. But because of his anti-authoritarian nature and having some weird pro-German sentiments because of his heritage, he opposed to fighting in the war.
I take back what I said about him being a good guy.
This is not the one where you want to take Germany's side, even though it's like probably 1941 and you don't know about concentration camps.
Yeah, you don't know. All German citizens had it implanted in their head what was happening.
They're all sleeper cells, and if you say Budweiser too many times, you activate them.
The most German beer there is, made in Van Nuys. Van Nuys. You know, that Dutch sounding name.
It didn't matter, though. His feelings towards the war, people were trying to push him to do it. It didn't matter because in 1942, he got drafted to the military service. The following year, he reports to New Orleans draft board. He was, I guess, living in New Orleans at the time, and he sent them a letter saying he had no intention of serving due to personal philosophy. And after that, they gave him a psych evaluation, and they agreed with him that you don't need it. You're actually quite antisocial. But they still they threw him in jail a year later because of this, because he was actively not adhering to the draft. And even they cleared him, they still they ended up taking him in custody in 1944 for draft evasion and threw him in the 17th century castle-looking prison in Philadelphia called the Montmorency Prison with a bond of $1,000. There, he was given a second physical and psychological exam, and once again, they were like, oh, you're good. You don't need it. We don't need you. Throughout all of this, the rambling and the flirting with active duty, Bukowski was in New York writing every day and constantly submitting and failing and trying. In 1944, the same year as a draft deal, Bukowski got his first work published in Story magazine. The short piece was titled Aftermath of a Lengthy Rejection Slip, and it was just that. It was what he felt after getting... I'll read a little bit of it.
It was always poetry, or did he ever do...
No, it was... Because he'd written novels. It was just you'll get a feel for when I read it.
Okay.
An honest story about dealing with a particularly detailed rejection letter. Here's the opening.
Lord Almighty, it must be 109.
I better do my Elvis doing Bukowski voice.
I imagine a similar voice.
Outside and thought about it. He has a very high voice for his look. Yeah, not that high. I remember thinking he sounded like Truman Capote.
Oh yeah,
but not so much. He just has a higher voice.
I guess authors don't have the voices you expect.
Often.
No, author. I said
author.
And
I'm saying often they don't have.
I said authors don't.
Authors.
This is our new Abbott and Costello routine.
Yeah, this is our.
Who's on author? Often. That's really as far as the joke goes.
I walked around outside and thought about it. It was the longest one I ever got. Usually they only said, sorry, this did not quite make the grade, or sorry, this didn't quite work in, or more often the regular printed rejection form. But this was the longest ever. It was from my story, My Adventures in Half 100 Rooming Houses. I walked under a lamppost, took the little slip out of my pocket and reread it. Dear Mr. Bukowski, again, this is a conglomeration of extremely good stuff and other stuff so full of idealized prostitutes, morning after vomiting scenes, misanthropy, praise for suicide, etc., that is not quite for a magazine or any circulation at all. This is, however, pretty much a saga of a certain type of person, and in it, I think you've done an honest job. Possibly we will print you sometime, but I don't exactly know when. That depends on you. Sincerely yours, Whit Burnett. Oh, I need the signature, the long H that twisted into the end of the W and the beginning of the B, which dropped halfway down the page. I put the slip back in my pocket and walked down the street. I felt pretty good. Here I only had been writing 2 short years. It took Hemingway 10 years, and Sherwood Anderson, he was 40 before he got published. I guess I would have to give up drinking and women of ill fame, though. Whiskey was hard to get anyhow, and wine was ruining my stomach. Millie, that would be harder, much harder. That was the first little chunk of his short story that got taken. This was his story.
This was the story that broke him out of prison.
This is it. Yeah, this is a story that the first story got published. That's his writing. It's just what he's going through, what he's feeling, dealing with drinking and women and rejection and all his feelings. It's very honest. It's very honestly.
Yeah, it sounds hard to read. Is it?
Not for me. I mean, I don't like...
Well, for a happy person.
Emotionally hard to read? Yeah, probably.
No.
Probably.
Are there big words in this, Greg?
I mean, it doesn't deal with any frivolities, which is what always weighs down stuff I want to read. That's why I took to Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler, because it's so...
To the point.
Almost because of Dashiell Hammett was a detective for a while, so all the writing is correspondence of he did this. I followed him here. There's the opening of one of Raymond Chandler's books is talking about them destroying the front of a building, and they're talking about something. And I was like the Judge Judy meme of let's go, smacking my watch and pounding the table.
I don't know memes.
Go.
I only know Spider-Man meme. I don't know this meme.
So anyways, he felt really good about his first story getting published. After that, he fled New York for warmer climates and returned to Los Angeles, taking up menial jobs once again. He took jobs like a stockroom boy at Steers Roebuck, a truck loader working in the graveyard ship at a bakery, package wrapping and box filling in the cellar of a ladies' sportswear shop. He worked at a tool warehouse and many department stores. For a 10-year stretch after he got his first published story, he would write less and less and drink more and more. A devastating amount of alcohol every day to cope with life and all its big and little traumas. In 1948, he was arrested for public drunkenness, one of the many times this happens, and is held in jail overnight, which is it just becomes my monthly jail visit.
We're sending you back to Philadelphia.
That same year, 1948, Bukowski meets someone he called the love of his life, was Janet Cooney Baker, who was an alcoholic barfly 10 years older than him. Their relationship was tumultuous, and the entire decade they were together on and off, living together, then breaking up, and then finding each other again. Most likely married and divorced at some point. And she was his equal in thriving at rock bottom. She would match him drink for drink every night. So sometimes you can find your equal, and it just makes the love of your life could be the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
How old is he now?
1948. He's probably 28,
20,
almost
okay.
30. He was born in 1920.
Does he ever become famous in his lifetime? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good
Not
for him.
worldwide famous. It kind of comes from Cult Underground. And by the time he dies, I think he's pretty well known.
Okay. I thought it was like a Van Gogh sort of thing.
Oh, no. It's funny that we talk about like tortured artists and we're like, what a scumbag. But Van Gogh, poor guy.
but he was French. It's okay when you're French.
It's okay when you're French.
Greg, when you're French, they let you do it.
In France, there's no such thing as mental illness.
How you say, I'm fine.
I'm fine. All the while, they were rooming in cheap places from Skid Row to Pico Union and Westlake, a lot in this little area there, like the periphery of downtown. The same year that Bukowski and Jane are evicted from the Aragon apartments for fighting and drinking, 1950, is the same year that Bukowski takes one of the more important of his humdrum jobs. He becomes a clerk at the Foy Station Post Office.
Oh, yeah.
It's a temp.
Finally, the thing he's known for.
It's very you. It's a temp job for Christmas. So
No, okay. It's both of us. This guy is a little bit of both of us.
It's a temp job for Christmas, so he'll take it. But 2 years later, he's able to return to a permanent position working at the Sanford station. Drinking and working at the post office was his entire existence at this point. He really wasn't writing that much. After he got his first story published, I think that he thought it would be easier. And it was one small victory, a massive
Won the
war of losing.
battle, lost the war.
Exactly, yeah. So he was continually, after that, I think he thought it would be easier to get published again, and it just wasn't. So he kind of like was discouraged.
I can't relate to this guy.
There's a really great quote from his novel Women, where he describes alcoholism, and I think about this quote a lot. This quote should be on the walls of Bevmo, but it's not. That's the problem with drinking, I thought, as I poured myself a drink. If something bad happens, you drink in an attempt to forget. If something good happens, you drink in order to celebrate. And if nothing happens, you drink to make something happen. Alcoholism, baby.
Welcome to Bevmo.
Welcome to Bevmo.
There's just like a somber employee standing at the entrance that just recites that to you when you walk in, and then the lights come on. Welcome to Bevmo.
Welcome to Bevmo.
We've got mead.
10 years later, 1954, when his excessive drinking puts Charles Bukowski in LA County Hospital for 9 days, suffering from a bleeding ulcer that would have likely killed him. It didn't. Getting this close to death scared him out of his funk, though, and after this, he would actually start writing again with the intent and focus and drive. He quits the post office the following year, although he's soon asked to be rehired, I think a month later. And when Jane vanishes from his life, he has a short-lived marriage to a Texas poet editor named Barbara Fry. Now, I saw photos. I'm like, what's Barbara Fry? I want to see what all these women that he was hooking up with look like. I don't know why I thought it mattered.
For your fantasy.
There's a photo of him and a very unpleasant looking person who looks like, that looks like his equal in everything. That looks like the manifestation of all his writing in one
He created her out of dirt.
And I wanted to know who that person was, and it turned out to not really be anybody. But so I was looking through photos of him and all the people he married, and I saw photos of her, and she had seemed at first to be a little person. It wasn't until like 3 articles later that I found out what was actually going on. She had 2 missing vertebrae from her neck, and because of that, she had a curvature of the spine, which gave her like a permanent hunch, which sounds incredibly painful. So basically, she has no neck, so she sort of is always hunching and stuff. So she was the editor for a Texas literary magazine, and her and Bukowski had been sending letters back and forth. And in the letter, she told him she was afraid no one would marry her because of her condition. So Bukowski, who had never met her, wrote back that he would marry her, and he did, and they got married. And after reading a little bit about their marriage, it's clear that she settled. She was the one who was. He's such an angry, sad mess, and she seems time and time again to try to get him help.
Why would either of them agree to this?
I don't. The loneliest people.
Yeah, this is
like the bottom.
They both mail order brided each other.
And they were both like, God damn. Yeah, she tried really hard to get his life together. Like, got him a car, tried to get him working in a job, tried to get him published, and he just wouldn't have it. Like, he's just such a sad self-destructive mess that like any progress feels dishonest. So he bombs, like self-sabotage. Like he just bombs it. After reading a little about their marriage,
sounding a lot more familiar the more I hear about him.
They divorced after 2 years, and she sadly would die from mysterious circumstances in India after this. I read on the website, she was quoted as saying, despite publishing him, she was genuinely unimpressed with his writing skills, which is probably the meanest thing you could tell somebody.
That was her wedding vow.
The rest of the 50s is just more hardships for this guy. More post office, some night art classes at LACC, more drinking. His parents die within a short time frame. He gets divorced from Barbara after 2 years, like I said. He attempts to kill himself the Sylvia Plath way, and it doesn't work. He faces more rejection in his writing, but he keeps at it this time. He's writing, and he's getting rejected, but
what year is this now?
It's like mid-50s, probably the end of the 50s.
So he's in his mid to late 30s.
He once again
tracks.
He once again Easy. Save the revelations for later, okay? He once again reconnects with Jane, but she drinks herself to death in 1962, the love of his life. The characters Betty in Post Office and Laura in Factotum are pretty much based on her. She's more or less portrayed by Faye Dunaway in the movie Barfly, but we'll get to that. Later in his life, he wrote a poem called Barfly for Jane. I'm going to read it. Yeah, exactly. Snap at the end of it. Please don't applaud.
Applauding is crass.
Yeah.
Just shout.
That's what the bourgeois do.
Just smoke your doob really hard.
Jane, who's been dead for 31 years, never could have imagined that I would write a screenplay of our drinking days together and that it would be made into a movie and that a beautiful movie star would play her part.
He wrote the movie?
Yeah, he wrote the movie.
Wow.
Or he helped write it with the director, I think. And that a beautiful movie star would play her part. I can hear Jane now, a beautiful movie star. Oh, for Christ's sake. Jane, that's showbiz. So go back to sleep, dear, because no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find anybody exactly like you, and neither can I.
And in summation, Jane, get me off this crazy thing.
Called love. That's So I Married an Axe Murderer. I can't take that. That's Mike Myers. So
wait a minute. Mike Myers or Michael Myers?
Mike Myers
is in
So I Married an Axe Murderer.
And Michael Myers is a knife murderer.
He's a knife murderer. Please, babysitter killer.
Someone's got to change their name.
There's only one person in control of that.
God.
A
God, a.k.a. John Carpenter.
Which is whenever we want to legally change the name, we have to go to the church.
Please, God.
Please, God.
God, are you there? It's me, Margaret, but I want to be Judy.
I'm more of a Jane, really. By 1959, Bukowski realized that in 20 years of writing, he had earned $47. Sound familiar?
God, I want to not identify with this guy.
Oh, he makes it so easy. Just substitute drinking for eating candy and you'll got it.
Living in a shack in Atlanta eating candy bars.
This guy sounds pretty honest. He was rising the ranks at the post office, but it wasn't what he wanted. He wanted to write. So in 1959, through either self-publishing or underground publishing houses, I'm not really sure how chapbooks of poetry work, he gets Flower Fist and Bestial Whale published.
Okay.
He doesn't have to really appeal to anybody at this point to get something published because it's either, I don't know, a chapbook sounds more like a zine of its day where you just have somebody print it up for you. So he starts submitting a lot of poems to small literary journals and begins finally making contacts that will last him, like John Webb, who ran a magazine called Outsider. He's getting more attention, getting more poems published in underground poetry journals that, like I said, the zines of their days. An editor of Nomad read 15 of his poems live on KPFK, but Bukowski didn't hear it because he didn't want to have to buy an FM radio. I laughed at that and then I looked up. Somebody noted that it was probably $75 at the time. Like, hey, you need the money. Because of these chapbooks and self-publishing things, more people are starting to see it because it's actually written down somewhere where people are looking on these small independent things. So he's standing out from those and getting more and more attention. So through these early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, people are starting to actually give a care about his work.
They gave a hoot.
He was getting reviewed by bigger critics now, and he was winning all these small-scale awards while continually pumping out poems. He would not stop. Because now you don't have to submit stuff, really. You just are publishing straight from the pulpit.
I mean, that's kind of what we did.
Hey, am I going to say no?
K-Rock wouldn't broadcast our show, so he made our own
K-Rock.
So
I made my own Elvis parody.
Now K-Rock has to play my music.
They play Weird Al, don't they? He's still drinking, still getting arrested, but it seems like all this anguish was now ricocheting into poetry. Like all the trouble the chaos that he always creates, now it has a funnel to filter through and end up
harnessing
somewhere.
His chaos.
Harnessing chaos, exactly. In 1963, he released It Catches My Heart in Its Hands, New and Selected Poems, 1955 1963. Because of this, Bukowski has become an underground hit in LA poetry scene. His brutally honest and incredibly straightforward poems about life at the bottom is free of pretension, and because of that, his work stands out. Drinking, homelessness, sex workers, this is stuff that readers in the 60s were excited to read about too. Not clear about how much of a low-life dirtbag swagger was performance to stay on brand or not, because by this time he had built up a brand of he's that guy.
He's the gross guy.
Yeah, he's the gross guy. He gambles at the racetracks and he drinks all day and
he's getting more and more relatable. I famously made $3.
Famously, the one time you were there. Not even there you were there to watch a concert. You weren't even there to gamble, but you just happened to gamble. And look at you now, dirtbag.
I mean, they did have a statue of me. It looked a little bit like Seabiscuit, but it was me.
Yeah, we all know. We all know what they were going for. It's a metaphor.
He saw biscuits, he ate biscuits. I'm on a Seabiscuit diet.
Oh my God.
I eat horses.
I eat horses, don't I? I eat horses, don't I? So about staying on his dirtbag brand, he was quoted as saying, "I got my act up. I wrote vile but interesting stuff that made people hate me, but that made them curious about this Bukowski. I threw bodies off my porch into the night. I sneered at hippies. I was in and out at drunk takes. A lady accused me of rape. Like all of this was his brand." Go ahead.
You had me up to a certain point of like, this sounds like me doing stand-up comedy. And then you said one thing and I did not want to say that anymore.
Although a lot of LA comedy is that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like it wasn't hard for him to stay on brand.
Right.
He himself wondered how much of this was performance to stay on
Yeah,
brand.
I was going to ask, is he like, at what point are you kind of like, you know what, I want to stop drinking? But
yeah, I can't because my brand, my character, he doesn't know. He also has come out and said, I have no idea where Bukowski in the books ends and the Bukowski in real life. It's,
I mean, that's progress in a way.
in a way, yeah, recognizing that, but also like, because his writing is so honest and not veiled at all, like it's all the same.
Yeah.
Like you need to realize
I've got to
that
be unhappy to be funny.
there's, I mean, not to talk about another awful human being, Deconstructing Harry, which is a Woody Allen movie about like the only way I can cope with my life and look at it is when I write. And I look at it and I'm like, oh, that's what I'm going through. I didn't realize that. Cool. This is what is important to me. I couldn't realize it in my own brain because it's so full of awful.
It took the brain of Woody Allen.
So clearly this idea of Bukowski that the literary world had of him had to be upheld, and he actively fed it. Like I said, it wasn't hard to do. Around this time, he meets a woman named Frances Smith, and the following year, she'd give birth to Charles Bukowski's only child, Marina Louise. Around this time, he puts an ad out in Olay, which read, "Plea of interest. Anybody who wishes Charles Bukowski to write a book of prose, whatever it is in his head will come out in prose form, certainly to be colossal, whatever it is, should donate $500 and he will do the trick. So send $sign to 5124 De Longpre Avenue, Los Angeles, 27, California."
Okay, so now he has a Patreon account.
He has a Patreon, and for a certain amount of money, he will write poems.
He will write poems to you from around Los Angeles and send them to you. Handwritten.
Handwritten, by the way. Maybe desperate for money, new dad, sure, but also like confident and experienced and renowned enough now to put it out there like that.
Okay.
And probably got some, I don't know if that actually got responses or not, but probably.
In my experience, kind of.
Not what you hoped, but surprised that anything happened at all. Also, 5124 De Longpre between Kingsley and Normandy in Hollywood is now referred to as Bukowski Court. That's where he was living. That's where his daughter and Frances Smith all lived together.
Is his daughter still alive?
I think so.
Wow.
I think she is.
Weird to think
Born
about.
in 65. She's not that.
I mean, unless something
She'd be
happens.
like, unless something happens, she'd be in her 60s now.
Theoretically, she is out there. She
Yeah.
may be among us.
Be careful where you invoke the name.
Be careful where you Bukowski.
Yeah. In 1965, he got the attention of John Martin, who founded Black Sparrow Press, who would be his longtime, I put Punisher, Jesus, publisher and ally. What's an editor but what are you to me but a Punisher?
That's why I have all those Punisher stickers next to my Blue Lives Matter stickers.
That's what it is. I publish materials and punish my friends. John Martin sold his rare book collection and used the $49,000 to start Black Sparrow Press and published 4 Bukowski poems in the first issue of his new magazine, paying him $30 per poem. It was John Martin in 1966 who first urged Bukowski to write a novel, and 3 years later, in 1969, offered Bukowski $100 a month to quit the post office and write full time. $100 a month to live, and he said yes.
I mean, is that a lot or a little for back then?
It was a lot, but he was making $275 a month from the
So
post
it
office,
was
so
a
he
little.
had to come down a little bit. But he had, from some reason, I read somewhere, he had like a good chunk of savings, probably because I think he sold his parents' house. Had a lot of money from the post office.
He's a Nepo baby.
He's a
I
Nepo
knew
baby.
it.
The only reason he's a dirtbag is because his family is dirtbags.
His family got him like halfway towards dirtbag from birth.
It's 1969. He is 49 years old, 50 years old when he first gets published and it becomes a full-time writer.
This is, it's at the same time encouraging to hear stuff like this and deeply discouraging to hear stuff like this.
I mean, like, he gets a pass because there was a 10-year chunk where he only drank and didn't write. So, like, he could have hit it at
he could have been 39.
Yeah.
Imagine.
God, imagine making it at 39. Bukowski finally quit the post office. Yay. And took all those experiences for his first autobiographical novel, 1971's Post Office. He sold 75,000
Get over it.
He sold 75,000 copies in the U.S. and 500,000 copies abroad. He was very famous in Europe, which is you and Chuck Berry, brother. You and Dizzy Gillespie, brother.
You and Woody Allen.
Yeah.
And
He was
Roman Polanski.
And he was in his early 50s when his writing career hit its first milestone. He also wrote for Hustler at around this time and started his own short-lived magazine, Laugh Literary, and The Man, the Humping Guns, and earned $200 a night from the rowdy poetry readings that would often end in drunken brawls. He continued with Notes of a Dirty Old Man, which is like the first thing I read of his.
That's what I've heard of.
Yeah, Notes of a Dirty Old Man.
Which is probably where I get most of my impression of, well, he says he's a dirty old man, so he's a dirty old man.
I agree. We all agree. Yeah, that's probably the first thing I read from him, and it was like completely degenerate stuff. And at the time, I'm like, I need more degenerate stuff. And I hit a point where like, no more degenerate stuff. What's Flannery O'Connor up to? I'm like, oh no, she's bad too.
What's a nice author up to? Ernest Hemingway.
F. Scott Fitzgerald never drank right. Oh no. Because of the Notes of a Dirty Old Man, the FBI opened up a file on Bukowski having to do with his contributions to an underground magazine, Open City.
Like a pornography? No, I mean, I assume they think it's like a pornography.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, the title is very pornographic. The underground column, I won't read the title out here because you'll freak out, but it's kind of a pornographic
We'll
thing.
read it off the air.
Yeah.
When the on-air sign goes off.
It's kind of unclear why they opened the file. It might be pornography stuff, but some people, at least this article I read, thought it had to do with a story about an inebriated woman releasing $5,000 worth of pet birds into the air. And after post,
is that how the parrots showed up around?
That's how the parrots showed up. Like green screaming parrots. They're screaming because they're like, "Get me away from Bukowski."
Well, he passed on his trauma to the parrots.
Birds. After Post Office came another autobiographical novel, Factotum, in 1975, which they made a really good movie of in 2005, where Matt Dillon plays Chiansky.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really. I mean, I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Factotum, 1975, Women in 1978, Ham on Rye in 1982, which is about his childhood and teenage years, which is of course what a light read that was.
Is that anything have to do with Ham from the Breakfast Club?
Yeah, it's Ham from the Breakfast Club, and Ham is Holden Caulfield. Ham on Rye. He became friends with the manager of a dirty bookstore owner, an artist named George DiCaprio.
What? Really?
Yeah. George DiCaprio just keeps popping up.
Yeah, he does. He's the weirdo friend of various different artists from LA history.
Through the 70s, Bukowski was a cult literary icon, adding the upper crust literary art folk into his social circle of like drunks and junkies. To him, like everyone's invited. Like, well,
he got everybody hooked on smack.
Yeah, and this is like what we always talk about what makes LA stories like Raymond Chandler, what makes Raymond Chandler noir different, and it's like the highs and lows, like the biggest movie star in the world and a guy selling like
Charles Bukowski's drug dealer.
Yeah, exactly. They can end up running in the same circle in LA, and not everywhere in the world that can happen. In 1975, the LA Times reported he was earning $20,000 a year from his novels, appearances, and selling his film rights.
Again, is that a lot back then? I don't know.
I mean, I feel like $20,000 in 1975, I bet it's a lot of money. Like, not enough to live on, but you can brag.
He's got to go back to the post office.
He was profiled in Rolling Stone in 1976 and the subject of a documentary in 1977. At the end of the 70s, he was being commissioned to write a screenplay that would take 10 years to come into fruition and would later become the movie Barfly, starring Mickey Rourke as Bukowski's alter ego, Chiansky, and Fate.
That is perfect casting.
It's perfect, especially that era of Mickey Rourke. Yeah,
that is great.
He wasn't that impressed with Mickey Rooney. I'm sorry. I mean, nobody is.
Yeah, I thought you meant Mickey Rooney was cast as him, and that would be perfect.
That would be perfect. He wasn't that impressed with Mickey Rourke, but I think Mickey Rourke tried to do Bukowski's voice, and he was like, no, that's not what I sound like. But
we can do. Hi, I'm Bukowski.
Hi. And Faye Dunaway, I hadn't transitioned quite as much as I.
And then Charles Bukowski said.
And like I said earlier, Faye Dunaway played a version of Jane Cooley. For the movie, they even used a real apartment that Bukowski and Cooley had shared for a scene. And I think, if I read correctly, filmmakers didn't know that. And Bukowski's like, we both live here, right?
Minute. So like the scouting people,
like, let's find the grossest apartment we could find. And Bukowski's like, yep, this is it. How'd you guys do your research?
He goes in and he has like socks that he's taking out of the drawer.
He has like a hidden bottle of like whiskey like behind the floorboards. Bukowski was pretty involved in the movie. Even he cameos in a bar scene, and he would later write the novel Hollywood about the making of the movie. So that's Barfly. Barfly has that reputation. A lot of people really love Barfly. I'd seen like clips of it, but I never watched all of it. But I probably should do that.
Never even heard of it.
It's one of those sad drunk movies that sad drunks watch, and they're like, yeah, it's not that bad, but it's that bad. In 1988, Bukowski discovered he had leukemia and tuberculosis in the same year, and this would pretty much force him to stop drinking. theoretically it would force one person
on
to
paper it made him stop drinking.
On paper, it made him reconsider. This was the second scare for Bukowski, and he was seemingly tried to clean it for good. He kind of struggled with it. He got married to a woman named Linda Lee, I think Beckley, Beagley, Beighle. Hard to pronounce. Bailey, maybe. And they had lived in Los Feliz together. And according to Bukowski.net timeline, which is incredible, by the way, I read this passage and it made me laugh like out loud. He took her to Disneyland for her birthday and, quote, has a good time despite his firmly held belief that Mickey Mouse has no soul. Very funny.
He's like talking to the guy in the Mickey Mouse costume.
Yeah. Him and Goofy are just sitting on a bench like, that Mickey, man, he's got a real problem. I don't know where he's running from, but keep running, guy. Near the end of his life, he was living in San Pedro, which is probably how he came into contact with Doc Guthrie.
Yeah, where does that fit into this story? At what point is that the turning point in his life?
I imagine it happened very late in life because I don't know when he lived in San Pedro, but I know he had died in San Pedro. So it was probably near the end of his life. Leukemia took Bukowski in 1994, and its obituary, Charles Bukowski.
God, 1994? He was still alive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I wasn't born yet, but still. I was born, it's 2023 now? I was born in 2024.
I'm just sort of like a thing floating around, waiting to be born. In its obituary of Charles Bukowski, the New York Post used a photo of Mickey Rourke and Barfly instead of a photo of the poet himself.
I mean, if you're Charles Bukowski, I think
you'd
kind
be
of
pretty happy with that. Please.
When I die, I want Faye Dunaway's picture to be in the newspaper. On second thought, I want Mickey Rooney, but in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Oh, I want that to win on my obituary.
He was a man of class and elegance. Taste. A man of taste.
Sympathy for others.
A progressive fighter of social justice. And this is a photo of, I forget his name in the movie.
A hero to the oppressed, to the bullied.
So his obituary has a photo of somebody else in it, someone better looking person.
That's a great way to end his life.
But a memorial plaque is placed at his house in Andernach, Germany, where he was born. And the apartment at 503 Union Drive in Westlake was renamed by the new owners as the Bukowski. If you're a male urinating at Kohl's, you'll see Bukowski's name over a urinal, and it reads Charles Bukowski peed here.
All right. I only ever got the Mickey Cohen.
Oh, yeah, Mickey Cohen. Bukowski's another one. He lived through a lot of awful things and came into this world feeling unloved and left it being remembered for embracing the ugly parts of life wholly. His life showed the literary world that people living on the streets and drinking in dark bars have value, and even these people have profound thoughts and are worth talking to and listening to. And amongst his many poems, and he wrote a lot of poems, I remember watching a documentary on Bukowski called, I think it was Bukowski Born Into This, and it reminded me of this really great poem that I want to end on.
Let's see. Oh, hang on. Let me start playing Burning Love.
Yeah, Burning Love. Yeah,
the instrumental.
This is only a snippet of the poem because the poem's quite long, and only the part that I like is right up front, or a good chunk in the middle. The shoelace. This is just a snippet. A woman, a tire that's flat, a disease, a desire, fears in front of you, fears that hold so still you can study them like pieces on a chessboard. It's not the large things that send a man to the madhouse. Death he's ready for, murder, incest, robbery, fire, flood. No, it's the continuing series of small tragedies that send a man to the madhouse. Not the death of his love, but a shoelace that snaps with no time left.
What does that mean?
The big things, you're kind of ready for the big tragic things, but sometimes a small little thing will just break you.
Okay, that's sad.
Yeah.
Poetry, I'm so bad with poetry.
Me too. Poetry has to be read so...
It has to rhyme. Let's just put it.
It has to rhyme. It has to be about like a cute little bird or something. Nothing bad can ever happen in a poem. It has to be coupled with like a little drawing or something so I know what they're talking. So I remember that it's actually just about a bird.
And it has to be written by Shel Silverstein.
The only way I'll accept it. I'm not great with poems. Poems have to be like written in simple language for me to like, oh wow, that's profound. But if it's like golden sunsets at autumn, I'm like, what the hell does that mean?
The flowery barley. And the barley is like a metaphor for 4 different people from history.
I love when people explain like Robert Frost to me because I'm like, oh, that's really smart. Oh, that's really cool. Or Wordsworth. I'm like, that's really smart. But then sometimes when I read poems, it needs to be spoken in plain language for me to be like, oh, this is honest.
It's like, I think we talked about that with like contemporary art where we see it and like, okay. And then someone explains it and we're like, this is I must own this. This giant toothbrush. I have to put it in my apartment. It's a metaphor for this world needs to be brushed clean.
There's plaque
twice
in
a day.
The world. Make sure to floss
this world's
streets.
Gums are receding.
And I should just end on anyone who's a huge fan of Alley and Bukowski should check out the timeline at Bukowski.net because, like I was saying, it has everything he was going through year by year of his life, what was happening in LA history, what he was doing for a job, and all the addresses he was staying at. And it's
thorough.
It's thorough. So if you're somebody who wants to do a tour of Bukowski's life, that's a place to start. And that's Charles Bukowski's life.
What about Jumbo's Clown Room?
He went to Jumbo's Clown Room.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You.
I thought we knocked it out of the park really.
Now we can end
Now we
that
could say
story.
Jumbo's Clown Room. Yeah.